The streets of Boston were doing what they had always done, flags snapping lightly in a spring breeze, crowds pressed behind barricades, phones raised, voices layered into a soft roar of celebration. Runners pushed forward toward a finish line that had come to symbolize something simple: endurance. For a brief stretch of time, nothing was wrong. No alarms, no warnings, no sense that history had already shifted its weight. Then, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the rhythm broke. Not all at once, not in a way the human mind could immediately understand. Just a ripple, confusion first, heads turning, questions forming before answers existed. A city suddenly unsure of what it was looking at, and in that uncertainty, everything changed shape. The race didn't stop right away, but the story already had, because long before the news would catch up, Boston had already stepped into a different kind of afternoon, one it would never quite forget how to leave. Before anything fractured, Boston was simply alive. The kind of morning that doesn't announce itself as important, just another city waking up and stepping into its rhythm. Coffee steam curling out of paper cups, subway doors hissing open and shut, runners stretching on sidewalks, checking watches, adjusting bib numbers with quiet focus. It was marathon day in Boston, and that meant the city was temporarily transformed into something rare, a place where strangers became spectators to endurance. Families lined the streets in folding chairs. Volunteers in bright jackets moved like clockwork between barricades. The air carried that layered sound only big events have: cheers, chatter, footsteps, laughter breaking in and out like waves. And threading through it all, the runners, thousands of them. Some chasing records, some chasing memory, some just chasing the finish line because it represented something bigger than distance. Every stride stitched into a shared pulse running through the city. Boylston Street, near the finish, felt almost celebratory. Flags fluttered, cameras pointed. The last stretch of the race narrowed into something almost ceremonial, like the city itself was leaning forward to greet every runner as they arrived. No one there was thinking about endings. Not really. Because events like this feel eternal while you're inside them. The crowd doesn't imagine interruption. The runners don't imagine anything beyond the next step. Even the city seems to agree, briefly, to suspend doubt. If there was tension that day, it wasn't visible. It was the ordinary kind: fatigue in legs, anticipation in voices, sunlight bouncing off glass and metal like everything was exactly as it should be. And yet, history rarely announces itself in advance. It doesn't knock. It folds itself into the normal, quietly tightening the seams. So when the city kept moving that morning, it had no reason to believe it wouldn't keep moving just like this, right up until the moment it didn't. By midday, the marathon had become its own kind of universe. Not just a race anymore, something closer to a moving festival stitched through the streets of Boston. The final stretch near Boylston Street carried a strange dual energy, exhaustion and celebration colliding in the same breath. Runners arrived in waves now, some sprinting in sudden bursts of pride, others staggering forward, hands on knees, crossing into emotion more than distance. And waiting for them was a finish line that felt almost symbolic in its simplicity: just tape, paint, timing mats, and the weight of everything they had endured to get there. The crowd pressed closer. Voices rose and fell in uneven rhythm. Names shouted, encouragement offered to strangers, laughter breaking through clapping hands. Children were lifted onto shoulders, phones held high, capturing moments that would later feel bigger than they seemed in real time. Volunteers moved with practiced efficiency, handing out water, guiding runners, keeping the flow alive. Police officers stood watch at intersections, not tense, not alarmed, just present, as they always were at events like this. It was, in every visible way, controlled, familiar, safe. The kind of safety that doesn't feel like safety at all, because nothing is asking to be noticed. Near the finish line, everything narrowed into focus: the banners, the timing clock, the final push of feet striking pavement that had already carried them so far. Each runner crossing felt like a small ending inside a larger one. personal victories dissolving into crowd noise as quickly as they arrived. And yet, for all the motion, there was a strange stillness beneath it. Not silence, but assumption. The assumption that the day would continue exactly as it had begun, that the rhythm would hold, that nothing about this gathering of thousands of ordinary lives, briefly aligned in one place, could suddenly shift into something else. Because cities are good at normal, they're built on it, layer upon layer of routine, repetition, and trust in the idea that the next moment will resemble the last. So as the finish line kept receiving runners, and the crowd kept cheering, and the city kept breathing in its steady, practiced way, no one was listening for a break in the pattern. Not yet. It didn't arrive like a warning. There was no rising sound, no dramatic shift in the air, no visible signal that something fundamental had just changed. The city didn't flinch in unison. It didn't pause. At first, it was just reaction. People turning their heads toward something they couldn't quite interpret, a ripple of uncertainty moving through the crowd near the finish line of the Boston Marathon. Conversations breaking mid-sentence, hands lowering phones that had been recording celebration only moments before. Confusion has its own language. It doesn't need clarity to spread. It travels through expression, through hesitation, through the sudden way bodies stop moving with purpose and start moving with caution. Near Boylston Street, that language began to spread faster. Runners still coming in from the course were met with something they hadn't trained for, an atmosphere that no longer matched the event they were finishing. Volunteers looked toward one another, searching for information that didn't yet exist. Officials began to shift positions, not yet coordinated, but no longer casual. The crowd reacted the way crowds do when certainty disappears, in fragments. Some moved closer, trying to understand. Some stepped back, instinctively creating space. Some simply froze, caught between what they had seen and what they were still trying to believe. And, over it all, the normal sound of the marathon began to thin. Cheering didn't stop, it fractured. Clapping became irregular. Voices lost their rhythm. It was not yet chaos, not fully. It was something more unsettling. A system realizing, piece by piece, that it no longer had a script. Even the city seemed to hesitate in how it should respond, as if Boston itself had been briefly interrupted mid-sentence. And in that pause, small, incomplete, and still forming, something irreversible had already begun to take shape. Not in what people understood, but in what they no longer could. At first, it looked like adjustment, the kind of small, practical shifting that happens at large public events when something unexpected but unclear enters the system. People leaning to get a better view, officials speaking into radios, volunteers stepping slightly out of their assigned lanes as if the map they were following had gained a new line no one had marked before. Near the finish area of the Boston Marathon, motion changed its texture. Not faster, not slower, just less certain. The crowd, once unified in celebration, began to separate into invisible layers. Those who were trying to understand, those who were trying to leave, those who were trying to continue, as if continuation itself could hold the moment together. Runners crossing the finish line now entered a space that no longer felt like an ending. Some slowed without knowing why. Others glanced sideways, reading expressions before they understood events. Medals were still being placed around necks, but the meaning of the gesture felt temporarily displaced, like ceremony continuing after the music had shifted key. And then came the movement that changed everything without announcing it. Emergency response. At first, just a few units threading through streets that were never meant to carry urgency. Then more. Lights beginning to paint the edges of buildings, sirens layering into the soundscape, not yet dominant, but impossible to ignore. The city responded the way cities do when they are forced to multitask reality. Pedestrians began to clear paths without instruction. Barriers that once guided crowds now redirected them. Eyes followed vehicles instead of runners. No one fully understood the shape of what was happening, but everyone understood instinctively that the day had crossed into a different category. Still, there was no single moment where everything broke, only accumulation. Small decisions stacking into larger ones. movement replacing stillness, questions replacing assumptions, and beneath it all, the quiet realization spreading without words. Whatever this day had been meant to be, it was no longer that. By late afternoon, the energy of Boston had changed its shape entirely. What had been a celebration earlier in the day now felt like something carefully held together by response, attention, and uncertainty. Streets near the finish area of the Boston Marathon were no longer defined by motion, but by direction, people being guided, rerouted, accounted for. Emergency services had become the new rhythm of the city, not chaos, but coordination under pressure. Radios clicking, officers forming perimeters, medics moving with focus that left no room for distraction. Every action now had weight, every decision had consequence. The race was over, but no one was thinking about winners anymore. What remained instead was a widening space of questions. Families trying to find loved ones, runners still wrapped in foil blankets, sitting in clusters of quiet disbelief, volunteers standing idle for the first time all day, as if their roles had been temporarily erased. And above it all, the city itself seemed to pause, not in collapse, but in recalibration. Boston wasn't broken in a visible way. It was reorganizing itself around what it now knew. News began to move faster than footsteps. Phones stayed in hands longer than they were put away. The same streets that had carried celebration now carried updates, instructions, fragments of understanding that no single source could fully complete. And slowly, something else emerged beneath the response. Not panic, not confusion, but recognition. That certain moments don't end when they are contained. They extend outward, into memory, into policy, into how a city will stand differently in every gathering that follows. Long after the crowds had thinned and the finish line had been cleared, the city did what cities always do. It continued. But it did not continue unchanged, because events like the Boston Marathon don't stay trapped in a single afternoon. They settle into the structure of memory itself, quietly reshaping how safety is understood, how crowds are viewed, how ordinary moments are held a little more consciously. Boston would run again. People would gather again. The marathon would return. But layered beneath every future cheer, every crossing of that same finish line, there would now be something else. Not fear, not silence, but awareness. The kind that doesn't speak loudly, but never fully leaves.